So welcome everyone. This is a unique opportunity. We initially set this up as just an overview of the budget speech, and given the events of the last 2 days, we felt it was important to continue and push ahead with this conversation and to try and share some insights around what was tabled, what was proposed, and also some of our views and insights on that. And so we're very lucky to have a really fabulous panel this morning. Just a quick thanks to Teresa and the marketing team. They're online with us at the moment. And with notable assistance from Ankia Vega and Laura for their help. Kesh, thanks for coordinating this and the drama in the last minute. It was really well done, thanks. Catering team, Alex, Fulu, Temba, everyone, thanks for your putting yourselves out for us at short notice. And then let me start by saying that our CEO, global CEO, Mark Vorsatz, said, he always uses this saying, which I'm pretty sure he's stolen from somebody. He says, if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong room. So it certainly applies in this case. And I think that you'll all agree, once we all finish here today, that you'll share the same sentiments. However, although I might be the village idiot here, I can say that every time Mark Vorsatz has said that he's used that saying, it turns out I was in the same conversation, so I presume that must be a compliment. But just to introduce our panelists, I'm not going to go through all of their credentials because we'll be here at lunchtime. But starting from the far side, there's Yamani. He's our customs, indirect tax, and international trade practice lead. Rendani is our corporate and international tax corporate lead, group lead. And I'm going to skip you, Claude. I'm coming back to you now. Tabiso is the head of our transfer pricing practice group. And then Claude, I had to write this down because there's a lot here. I did warn you. Claude comes with a warning. He comes with a warning sign. So Claude is founder and CEO of Unomics, which is a resilience advisory firm. Commentator and analyst extraordinaire, I believe, right? Yeah, he's modest. He doesn't like that. But those of you who are familiar with Claude and his contributions to the national economic and developmental dialogue, you'll know him as someone who's fiercely patriotic. He's passionate about South Africa and the challenges that it faces. He's demonstrated time and again that he's indeed a man of his own mind and his own thoughts, and he's not shy to court controversy if necessary and appropriate. He's been known to receive a few uncomfortable calls from time to time from certain ministers, probably just to say hi and check in on him and see how he's doing. But it's a sure sign that he's performing an important check and balance on our behalf in the national dialogue, so thank you for that. So thanks for taking the time to be with us today and sharing your sentiments and your thoughts with us. And I really want to try and squeeze the most out of the session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists to try and be punchy and brief on their responses, with the exception of Claude, who's got a little bit of a poetic license to go beyond that. But I just want to make sure that we can get to a point where you can ask your questions and we can have a little bit of a question and answer session, because I think there's a lot of insight here that we'll miss through the usual question without a question and answer session. So that being said, let's get cracking. So Yamani, I'm going to start with you. Perhaps you just want to kick off and take us through what are the main points that came out of the budget speech that was abandoned on Wednesday.
Good morning, everyone. Again, as Derek has indicated, thank you so much for making time this early in the morning to be here with us and hear our many thoughts on what should have been, what ought to be, and what will likely be. On my side, I mean, the budget speech is often a thick document, but I normally have an interest in 1 or 2 pages, more focused on the indirect tax side. I think to start with the less controversial items in relation to the so-called sin taxes, which I've had a look at on the untabled speech. There, no major surprises, the typical suspect in relation to sin taxes, in relation to alcohol, as well as cigarettes and the likes. And I would anticipate those particular increases are very much standard and aligned with normal increases, and they're likely to remain when the speech is tabled again sometime next month. But more controversially, which has seemed to have been the main talking point, has been what would have been the proposed increase in relation to value-added tax, which on its own ought to not have been controversial, but more than taxation side of things would speak more to the political side and more the planning of side, considering that this particular speech is something that was anticipated for some time, and one would ask, some of these key questions and items that have become to be objected, why is it that they were only discussed and being clashed on the very last minute? So what seems to have been the stumbling block from the VAT side would have been the proposed 2% increase on VAT, which have taken it to 17%. And what the minister would have emphasized on would have them having looked at all the particular taxes where they could possibly increase, and they saw VAT as the most likely one that would have been more feasible, in particular in relation to avoiding to increase corporate income tax, as well as personal income tax, which they seem to, corporate income tax would have been a scary part for investors. So they wanted to motivate more from investment side and corporate tax, as well as it would have been too steep for the working class in terms of income tax. So VAT was seen as this almost neutralizer in terms of which one everyone gets to would have paid a flat amount where in relation to increase revenue. But if one were to slightly be more critical on that and look in terms of who and whom it would have benefit from, there's a lot of talk as to there would have been maybe a bit more pinchy for the so-called poor, and in fact benefit those that are already in the higher middle class in terms of the wealthy ones. Even the balancing effects that would have been placed in terms of zero rating, one, if we were to look at the basket of items that would have been chosen, they still would have likely to have benefited those that are slightly in the higher income levels, because they would have been able to buy more than they would. In fact, yesterday I had an opportunity to sit in one of the site sessions doing a similar review, and one of the panelists there pointed out that those, the so-called poor, the systems in place in terms of to where they buy, there's nothing in place to almost monitor as to whether the actual price reductions in terms of VAT systems and price increases would actually be implemented. They went as far as to do a mini study where they indicated that, in fact, the so-called cheaper products that have gotten benefits from VAT reductions actually remained higher, and actual benefits would have been in those affluent areas where there's system in place and the people that have appetite to actually challenge the pricing, as it would have been and as currently it is. So overall, as I've indicated before, when you look in terms of the rate in which we have in South Africa from a VAT side, it's not as high as you would see in other jurisdictions, and the phasing out that we have had over the years has not been too steep. But as I've indicated, these considerations go beyond just taxation. When you consider the country as a whole, the political landscape, the social landscape, the inequalities. So I think it's something that ought to have been more thoughtful and implemented proper. But if I were to make an estimate, I think it's something that will come. I think it's just a matter on how it is phased in, how it is introduced, taking into account all the sensitivities, that go beyond just taxation, but factoring, the social aspects and the political landscape of the country.
Thanks, Yamani. That's great. We're going to touch on VAT a little more in a moment because I think there's a couple of other points worth mentioning. But before we do that, I just want to quickly give you guys just a rough overview of some of the highlights that came out of that budget speech. And one of them is, an allocation of over 1 trillion rand for public infrastructure over 3 years, focusing on transport, which was 402 billion rand. Energy, 219 billion rand, and water and sanitation, 156 billion rand. There's a move to try and expand the public-private partnerships to accelerate project delivery. There's a proposed increase in social grants, and I think that the number of the old age and disability grants would rise by 150 rand, and child support by 50 rand, and foster care by 80 rand. The extension of the COVID-19 Social Relief Fund, that was a really controversial one. I think some people feel that the extension to March 26 with 35 billion rand is possibly a little bit excessive, but be that as it may. There's an allocation to education and early childhood development of about 19 billion rand to retain 11,000 teachers. 10 billion for early childhood development services, increasing subsidies per child and expanding on access to 700,000 more children. So we're seeing those, that kind of social spending increase, and education and related aspects. Insofar as fiscal strategy is concerned, there was, as Yamani said, this proposed increase to the VAT to generate an additional 58 billion rand. In the context of the drama that it's created, you have to wonder whether the 58 is worth it. But we can touch on that in a moment. In addition to that, actually also another point worth mentioning is that people talk about a 2% increase in VAT. It's actually a 13% increase in VAT. It's only 200 basis points, so which amounts to an effective increase of 13%. And so when you talk about gradual phasing in, perhaps maybe that was something they could have thought about. And then the debt stabilization is projected at 76.1% of GDP by 2025-26. And the budget deficit is expected to narrow from 5% to 4.4% in 25-26, which seems to be reasonable progress. I'm going to, just one additional thing I say, there are some other things here, but an increase in local government equitable share from 99 billion to 115 billion, so municipalities are going to get that additional spend. And there will be performance-based grants for municipalities which are tied to turnaround strategies. So there's obviously some kind of plan to incentivize them to get their act together where they need to. So before we pick up on the issues of the VAT, I just want to ask each of you, just out of 10, if you can just rate what you think the budget looked like as a factor out of 10.
Thanks, Dee. All right, so I'm just going to go 0. Right?
0.
So, okay, sure. I mean, look, it never really happened, right? It's hard to score something that never was. So, okay, but to be fair, I think either 0 or 10, and I'll tell you why. 0 because it was an absolute disaster, right? It just showed us as like incompetent people that can't even like get together around the table to make simple decisions, granted. But 10 in the sense that, it did show kind of like our democracy moving forward, where we can actually challenge certain things that would have been, forced up, upon us in the previous government, where we didn't necessarily have the right muscle to actually push back on those sort of things. And so depending on where you stand, it's either a 0 or a 10.
So process aside, content, fiscal content?
If it was going to be presented in that fashion, I'd probably give it a 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to come to you last, Claude, because I'm going to ask you to expand on that.
I have no opinion on the matter.
Johnny, out of 10?
It's a difficult question. I would just go to the median of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yamani?
Yeah, I mean, not to be as harsh as Tabs. I think it was pretty balanced. Like anything else, it could have been better. I think it took into account, several issues, international relation consideration, where the economy is moving. I'd probably stick at 5 as well. I mean, okay. Just about.
Claude, out of 10?
I'm not even going to gratify this meaningless question with an answer. It's
suitably chastised. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, the beautiful thing about the budget speech is that Harida up there spoke longer than the minister did. And probably said more meaningful stuff too. Minister, please do call me to chastise me. I really need it. I love it when you do that. Hell is paved with good intention, and this is another one of those budgets that is a demonstration that for the past 15 years, South Africa has had no economic policy to speak of, and therefore the budget and the job of the Treasury is simply to manage decline, which they have done at times well, in the sense that they've really kind of slowed decline, and at times they have been contributors to acceleration, you know, including the, what is that, 24-hour special or weekend special? The fundamental problem I have is that there are no technical solutions to political problems, and our political problems have been mounting without being addressed. I am relieved that the GNU partners have finally found that they have the political courage. I was going to be rude, and then I realized that I shouldn't be. The political courage to say no. Because this hasn't been a GNU for any real purpose. The problem I have with these kind of conversations is that they take place at the technical level. And so, I mean, you mentioned earlier the fiscal consolidation, blah, 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 blah. I've been hearing this utter crap for the past 15 years. And so if you take, because I am stupid enough to do these things, you know, so what I do is I've taken 20 years of growth and budget and fiscal projections, and then I compare them with their realization, because no one does that, right? It's like, so what you have is you have this, after a couple of years of decline, you know, we will go to consolidation of the growth project, and we'll see an improvement of our growth, you know, from, 0.7 suicidal level to moderately depressed to somewhat promising. And we look forward to that, which will allow us to reduce, obviously, the primary deficit, and will then give us an opportunity to reduce the size of the debt repayment, because we're going to have debt consolidation, and we'll all be happy in the business cycle. But I've been saying that since 2015, the business cycle in South Africa no longer exists. It's dead. And it's dead because the fundamental structure of the economy have been depleted. Whether it's, let's use Marxist language, whether it's the superstructure, so the thinking, the theories, and those in charge of doing that, in government and private sector and civil society, depleted of capacity, of skills, of expertise, of ideas, whether it's the infrastructure, right, so what allows you to produce stuff, or whether it's what's called in between, which is called economic activity, which I call kind of, well, the structure. All of these levels have been depleted. And so there is no growth to be had until and unless true reform take place. And there hasn't been a political will to reform. So we've been managing decline, right? So we're moving this failure to that, and then we just take it and we're moving it there. And then say, oh, wait. And then you used to have Patel saying, oh, wait, with this I can re-engineer a mining industry. You know, I'm just going to give them some incentives and some tax breaks, and they're going to be, oh, but I hate these guys who are actually producing something, and these guys, we're going to punish them with all sorts of taxes and stuff. The result is this. So the problem is that when the world was nice and friendly, we didn't catch the wave. So South Africa is now one of the worst performing, year-on-year, emerging market economy. To the point, and I'm sorry, I'm going to stop then, but you know, you told me I could take
just a little bit of poetic license,
yeah.
I think.
So, you know, as I say, from a poetic license standpoint, as my good colleague, I forgot his name, poetic license.
Yeah.
The problem is that we now have a very unfriendly world.
Yeah.
So we've wasted tremendous opportunity, and now the headwinds are absolutely enormous. I don't believe in this budget any more than I believe in last year's budget or the year before or the year before. Nor do I believe that the ANC is an honest partner to a GNU.
Reflected by the fact that the GNU partners hadn't signed off on this 2% VAT increase. Yeah, interesting. Obviously, interesting views. I guess short of deep structural reform, which long-lasting, sustainable structural reform. I guess we're stuck where we are, right? And
That's
so,
a question for you.
exactly. And the question, I guess, the question I'm going to ask you is: was the 2% VAT increase? Was it an attempt to paper over some cracks, or and try and keep the boat from sinking?
Well, yes, I think the boat was going to sink, but I think it was going to sink because they willed it to sink, right? And I'll come back to what I'm saying. Sorry, I'll just explain it a little bit more in detail. But when we just start at the very outset and put context onto this, so the minister had three options of finding revenue. So it was either curbing expenditure, it was borrowing with junk credit. I'm not even quite sure what that even looks like. Or, getting into the taxation space. So now once we get into tax, we've got other three items that we need to consider. Personal income tax, right? That is just a no. At least for me, I don't want to pay more. I'm not quite sure, but
everyone else feels.
yeah, I mean, people are wealthy and whatever, but I just can't afford it. But to be honest, I think the tax base is incredibly small. So there's no way that we can even start talking about something like that in any meaningful way. Corporate tax, I think that's also a non-starter. There's nothing we can do about that. I mean, we've missed the wave, like it's been said, so we do need that foreign investment coming in. There's been a couple of initiatives that have been proposed to actually increase that corporate tax. One of the most spoken about is the global minimum tax.
Yeah.
But insofar as SARS has assessed it, it's only going to increase revenue by about 8 billion, right? So that is completely nothing.
Drop in the ocean.
Yeah, drop in the ocean compared to what we're looking at in terms of the other numbers. And so now that 2% came in, and I think it was kind of like a very fortunate situation because they figured it out that, look, we absolutely have no other option, and VAT is very broad-based, so why not just, getting on the VAT? Yeah. So, and that misses at least 2 points. I mean, there's a number of points you can say about that 2% increment. The first one is it's going to increase inflation drastically. We know that. And then we know, as Yamani has already touched on, that the supply chain in South Africa in terms of, sourcing of raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, and consumption, it is highly layered because of the fact that the South African, the supply chain itself, it needs a little bit more to operate. So things like, additional transportation costs to be able to reach out far and remote places in South Africa where people actually need all of these goods. And so at the end of the day, that 2%, it just doesn't do anything. And also people are on Ozempic, people are not eating, people are not consuming anything. People are intermittent fasting. So really, when you look at it, it's it's 2%, but is it really going to be 2% in terms of the rands and cents? Are we going to hit that 58 billion? And the answer is no, right?
Yeah.
We've already spoken about the exemptions. I don't think they work. Studies have shown that exemptions don't work. Sorry, zero-rated items, yes.
I was going to touch on that, the impact of zero-rated items and whether or not there's some level of relief that could have balanced out the impact of this 2%.
Right. So in a perfect world, zero-rated items only trickle down, just in terms of percentages, only 33% of the total value that is stated in theory as being the saving trickles down to the consumer. So when you look at VAT, VAT is a consumption tax, right? It only hits the consumer. So if only 33% of that supposed saving is coming to you, then it's a non-starter.
Then it's a non-starter.
Right. So I think what should have happened is maybe look at other things, because now we're talking about social grants, right? Which there will be an extension of the COVID-19 grant. I'm not quite sure why that is. And also there is an increase of about 25 billion of the childcare grant?
Yeah, the childcare grant.
Yeah, 25 billion. And it's quite interesting because they had said that they're increasing the childcare grant to counter against the increase in VAT. I mean, that is like, that is, okay,
But
sorry,
that
I'm
makes
not
no
going to say
sense.
it's stupid, but words are very
It's
hard to come by.
nonsensical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's thank you, sir. Yes. So now, if you take just those two amounts, right? Just take the social, the social grant, the total of what I've just mentioned. That is pretty much 58 billion. That is how much they anticipated to get from the VAT. So then what's the point?
What's this set itself off?
Yeah, so is this even something that we need to be talking about? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, thanks. Perhaps, Rendani, maybe you want to give some thoughts about whether there were other avenues within the tax base that the minister could have looked at in order to try and raise funding outside of just VAT. I mean, for example, corporate tax or taxing wealth, do wealth taxes, any other options?
I don't really think there was much scope. So if we look at corporate tax, South Africa, as we stand, we are one of the high taxing countries at a corporate level. So, for example, if you look, let's say globally, in Europe, you would have a few countries like Germany who are still above your 27%. If you look at the continent, you look into East Africa, so you've got Kenya with 30% and the West, Nigeria with 30% tax rate. So even though we're not in the 30s, but we're still on the high. So you have got, if you look at maybe comparing with other developing countries, you look at a country like India, it's taxing at 22%, and even you look closer to the continent, Egypt, which also attracts a lot of investment, it's taxing at 22.5%. So I don't really think South Africa had any opportunity, and also that's more aligning with the global trends, because if you look in the past few decades, the focus is on reducing corporate tax rate, and so you get to the level where some countries are even going below 20%. So I think that was not really an opportunity to look at.
Yeah.
And then if you look at wealth tax, you remember in 2013, the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, had asked the Davis Tax Committee to look as to whether there was a feasibility of introducing wealth tax. And the result of that investigation was that South Africa is not ready for that. And if there were any recommendations, the view was that the country need to focus on the current wealth taxes that we have, like estate duty, transfer taxes, and donations tax. And I think some of those recommendations led to an increase a bit on estate duty. So then the question also was more of the fact that they didn't believe that as a country, like in the form of the collecting agent as the South African Revenue Services, that there would be capacity to really manage a wealth tax, because because the country would not really have data which the South African Revenue Services would assess in terms of determining as to how much they could generate, assuming there was a wealth tax introduced. And also the experience globally is, if we take India for an instance, they tried to introduce a wealth tax, but they abolished it. And the reason why they did that is it wasn't generating as much taxes as they thought it would. And at the same time, I think administratively, it was a challenge. You look into Europe, I think you have countries like France who have got a wealth tax. And I understand in the 90s, there would have been maybe around 9 or 10 countries within the OECD that had a wealth tax. But I think as of 2017, we were sitting with probably 4 countries because most of the countries have either abolished the legislation. And I guess the other bigger impact of wealth tax is you have people live in the country. So France experienced that. So you had French people who were moving to Switzerland because of the protection, the bank secrecy rules. And then you also have people moving to Belgium because Belgium didn't tax them the way the French government was doing that. So I think there hasn't really been a good sort of a precedent when it comes to wealth tax, and hence the reason that would not have been an option. And I guess as Yamani mentioned earlier, I think that just happened to be...
Wrong place at the wrong time.
It's simple. It's a simple tax. And it's broad-based, so you collect from everybody. Yes, there's a challenge to say, the worst impacted will be the poor. And then the question is, does the zero rating of certain items really help the poor?
Yeah.
Because, I think I was in the same session that Yamani listened to yesterday with the South African Institute of Tax Practitioners. And somebody on the panel said he did a very simple example just before the 19th, and he used a loaf of bread, of brown bread, isn't that zero rated? He said here around this area, I guess in the suburbs, a loaf of bread would be 15 rand. And he then asked somebody in Soweto as to how much would you pay a loaf of bread in a spaza shop? And the answer was 19 rand. And then he comes from the Eastern Cape. He then asked somebody in his village to ask as to how much do you pay for a loaf of bread? And they said 17 rand. So this is the item we're saying is zero rated. But at the end of the day, the zero rating doesn't really help the poor because you could see it's only, I think, those of us in this room who benefit from that.
Yeah.
Because we have got supermarkets and we're not buying from this puzzle shop.
Yeah. Yamani, do you think it would be safe to say that the default position to just fall into a VAT increase is sort of morally bankrupt? The idea of just increasing VAT, given the impact that it has on the poor, and particularly if you look at the sin taxes, they affect in a disproportionate way the lower income classes because they're the ones that are primarily consuming alcohol and cigarettes in a way that the public health system probably doesn't want them to. It feels to me as though there's a deep moral dilemma here about where they're going to get this money from, and they sort of have lobbed it onto the poor without really thinking this through.
Well, I think when TAPS began, he spoke of these uncharted scenarios we're having of the change of political winds in the country. And one where I'm sitting, I'm not sure whether it should be exciting or should be scary because on a lighter note, we have a situation where a budget was strongly objected by the DA, citing that it's anti-poor, with a budget that was tabled by an ANC minister. So you're having some of those juxtaposition in our context. And further that, this speaks to a lack of a clear path and a goal as a country. I think you speak of a lack of policy direction economically. We tend to be a country with beautiful written document that we never fully implement. I mean, we still have the NDP, previously we had the RDP and all the likes, which were beautifully written but never seemed to be implemented in the way that they should be. And more directly to your question, I'm not sure if I can point it to a question of morality, but what I could say is that in terms of the rates that are there in place, I mean, they're high enough, we should be collecting enough, but the conversation that those running things are not ready for is the expenditure of that which is being collected, questions of corruption, and those that get to be taken accountable. People are indicted, but we never get to see where that ends. I think that's where we should look into, I think one of the reasons that was pointed up was the public wage bill, you know. One has to look into whether the government cannot look into alternative investments, rather creating an environment that is conducive for investment and creating jobs rather than bloating the wage bill of the state, you know. Coming back again to the praises or critics that we're having from a so-called UNE perspective, as I was indicating, whether we should be excited or we should be scared, because now, for the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to be faced with a situation where not necessarily the interest of the country, the economy will always be taken into account, but we'll have a Minister of Finance now that will have to factor the different key interests, you know, within the parties, you know, which may not always necessarily align, again, reverting back to the conflicts as to what policy direction we have as a country economically, what goal do we have as a country. So we probably could sit again next year having a similar conversation, you know. Whether we are doomed or getting into exciting times, it's something to be seen. But in terms of taxation, at some point, rates must increase, revenue must be collected. It's something that we cannot avoid. But the scary part for me is to what will influence those decisions, you know, in the next couple of years. Yeah.
Claude, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, doom can be very exciting. But to the point of the morality question, I think this is key, because public policy is about morality. Policy is about morality. And so, again, I'm known as being a one-handed economist, right? I call it. This is not working. This is not the right policy framework. We don't have the right public sector. We don't have, and it's not, these are not political opinions. They are backed by data. So another exercise I do with the data is that I look at the economic return of public expenditure. You spoke about that. And we have, in essence, if you go back to 1995, so what you have, 95, you have an unsustainable fiscal situation, an unsustainable economic situation. And obviously you have a very tense political situation. And then you have an ANC which comes and renegotiates with itself its strategic framework for delivering to the people the promises it has made. And the initial promise is one of socialism and nationalization and RDP and all that. And then but it's not part of the zeitgeist, and the ANC kind of undemocratically, the leadership embraces what was wrongly called kind of neoliberal policies, but in fact represented a very interesting form of economic nationalism for me. And I've always said Mbeki was the country's true nationalist, in the sense that he understood that if you want to be sovereign, you have to have fiscal and budgetary stability. Otherwise, you will become dependent on your creditors, and you will be dependent on foreign powers. And so, and there is no doubt that he was a nationalist, and an African nationalist. But he understood that you need that, and it paid off, right? I mean, if you look at the trajectory of the 1995 to 2007, 2008 cycle, you have first, so you have no growth, and you have progressive fiscal consolidation, and a reduction in the debt load, which then by 2000 lead to an increase of social expenditure, including the introduction of social grants, which does not lead to a massive increase in debt, right, in the country, because we have growth. We are at 4.5%, which is enough for us to increase public service expenditure, all of that. There were strategic mistakes there in terms of capital expense, right? Always too low, always too little. Nowhere near the 20-25% of the budget where we should be spending on infrastructure and stuff like that. But the principle was correct. And so then you end up with growth and fiscal consolidation and public expenditures. And then you have the counter-revolution represented by Zuma and the Communist Party and the labor unions, who then take power and make the promise to create a people's republic back to RDP. And obviously, they deliver exactly what was expected out of that and forecasted. I mean, I'll share with you guys the stuff I wrote in 2008, 2009, saying this is the trajectory to state failure, right? Because we don't have the public sector that can deliver. We have the private sector that is an extraordinary asset. We had a private sector which was scorned, okay, and taxed and punished and sanctioned. And then we empowered a state infrastructure that does not exist and effectively captured the budget, right? So the growth return of every rands of tax revenue and government expenditure has been progressively decreasing. So instead of doing, expenditure per GDP, I do the opposite. I do GDP per expenditure, GDP per tax, GDP per export, GDP. That ratio gives you the productivity of tax. It gives you the economic productivity of expenditure. It gives you the economic productivity of the public sector. Then you take educational outcomes against the educational budget. And then you say, it's completely unproductive, it's wasted. Might as well not spend money on education the way we do it. Now, I'm not advocating for no expenditure on education or no expenditure on healthcare. But I'm saying we failed at everything. We failed since 2009, we failed at the social welfare system, right? We have failed at the developmental state, investment, and we have destroyed the basis of a private sector-led economy. And therefore, we are now out of technical solutions. The only technical solution is to completely change the software. But you have, again, the lack of political will. So that paradox, I'll finish that, but that paradox you raised is fundamental. And it tells us that, that the promises behind the ANC Social Democratic Compact are fundamentally a con in terms of the outcome.
I mean, that's absolutely right. And short of an absolute reset, which is a much longer term strategy, we have to deliver a budget speech on the 12th of March, right? And or maybe not, or maybe not. But the truth remains is that we have to come up with a short-term solution. And so, my late grandmother, who was a very simple old lady, she said, it's not what you make, it's how you spend it. And so is the answer, for purposes of going forward in the short term, to re-look at the expenditure line on the budget, because I think, as we've agreed on the panel today, that we're overtaxed, right? Everyone is stretched, everyone is thin, everyone's exhausted and fatigued. There's not much more you can squeeze out of this. And is it now not time for us to turn to the expense line on the revenue statement?
Oh, me? I thought
Yeah,
you
no, I
were
want
going to respond to that.
to hear
is it
what
me?
you said there.
Okay, yeah, look, it's obvious that the expenditure side isn't working, and it's obvious. So in terms of broad strategy, what I've been advising for many, many years, and I've had some interesting conversation in the presidency, where people say, well, we're coming around to thinking that maybe your view on industrial policy might not have been as wrong as we usually thought, or thought it was, right? There's been, but it's too slow, right? It's just so slow. Everything in this country moves at the speed of the snail being caught by the driving car on the highway. And the snail says, gosh, it's like, they only got half of my body, so I'm good. The forehead is, it's like, I lost one eye, it's like, oh, hey, yes! So the answer to this is, let's get out of the technical questions. Let's talk about, this is about politics. It's about politics. Let's not be afraid to talk about politics. This is your democracy if you can keep it, right? And everybody is so afraid of talking about politics. Yet that's what being part of a country, a citizen, is. It's about politics. The politics are broken. The people are saying so. And we are serving them the same stale old indigestible puree of crap, which we call politics and policy. It's not. But there is an imperative, a non-negotiable for me, politically speaking, is the social welfare system. Because otherwise we have July 2021 again, right? Yeah. So we have to subsidize the poor. And they're not so-called poor, they are poor. They're not like, oh, I'm a so-called poor. You're a so-called poor too? Yeah, they say we can't eat. But hang on, we have to save the welfare state. Yeah. But for it to be effective, we have to reform the public sector. And that means that we have to let go of the responsibility of capital investment and infrastructure investment and fixing what is broken to the private sector, to the non-profit sector. Walk away. But instead, what do we have? We introduce a public sector, a public health, national insurance, which is another sleight of hand politically, because the ANC knows very well they can't pay for it, but it's still playing the same old political game. Yeah. So hopefully this cancellation of the speech, let's just not call it cancellation of the speech, it's cancellation of the budget. The budget has been cancelled. Now, there may or may not be a new one. I would be perfectly comfortable with a situation where that thing lasts for a few months, because we've been trading with crisis, we've been playing with crisis for years, always just getting that much further. There's no time like now. Just change the paradigm. No, you're wrong. I'm sorry to say that, Derek, but you're wrong. Let's not say, but we're still having those conversations next year. Yeah. Let's not. Yeah. Let's not make you are tax professionals. Speak up. Speak up. Stop being side commentators who are politely speaking about, we are on the Titanic today, and we are passengers on the Titanic today, and seems to me that we had a slight problem. There are not enough boats, so what's your escape plan? Well, we don't talk about that, Let's talk about the speed at which this thing is, sinking,
So in terms of solutions, I think that obviously short of a structural reform and, policy change and overhaul, we've got to get through the short to medium term, right? So thinking outside the box, obviously trying to reduce expenditure and, picking a couple of key places where we can try and, you can recover that 58 billion. You touched on it, Tubbs, but you recover that 58 billion by just simply, just rebalancing the budget, right? What about the possibility of moving taxpayers back on the Laffer curve? What about the prospect of reducing taxes and the paradoxical consequence that people end up paying more? Is that a prospect?
It's a bit of a tough one. I would say so let's just maybe again have some context around this before I actually answer that outright. So in terms of taxes, we now know that SARS is doing the most with what they've got, right? There's brilliant women and men at SARS that are pushing as far as possible in terms of the tax collection. We've got people dealing in tax policy that are making sure that we've got proper legislation that will actually help with the collection of taxes and increase tax compliance. Because one thing that we've learned, I think, over a very long period of time is that it is not the aggression of SARS necessarily that increases, tax recovery. It's actually voluntary tax compliance by taxpayers. And so there's legislation that speaks to that, certain initiatives like your automated assessment, because certain people were simply not submitting their returns for whatever reason. And so there has been work that has been done, but within the powers that SARS has and with the limited resources that they've got, right? In addition to that, SARS actually has a pool of, other, stakeholders that can actually assist in the collection of all these taxes and making sure that we actually hit target. So, and to that I'll reference maybe the OECD's Tax Inspectors Without Borders. You know, there's like a wealth of expertise in there that relates to taxation and beyond taxation, on taxation-related matters. And so we can actually tap onto all of that and try and see if ever, you know, we can actually change the dial in terms of revenue collection. But here's the issue. Do we have the systems in place within SARS? Do we have the processes that will allow for all of these things to take shape and materialize? And my answer to that is no, right? SARS has not been financed properly for more than a decade. There was a time where SARS employees never received increases and or bonuses. We now know that, you know, apparently the SARS commissioner SARS was to receive about 3.5 billion for, you know, for that whole SARS modernization project that they wanted to start a couple of years ago. Is that still going to happen? We still don't know. So for me, there is scope, absolutely, but can we really get there with what we've got? And the answer is no.
Rendani, so I think, you know, we've established through the back and forth in this conversation that there's probably a combination of things. You know, it may be reducing expenditure, it may be creating incentivization for people to pay tax. Do you think that the tax evasion, the extent of the tax evasion, or the extent to which people are avoiding paying tax because of tax fatigue, do you think that's a factor in terms of collection? And do you think that there would be a benefit to possibly reducing the tax rates in some cases in order to increase compliance?
I'm not sure whether there's a right answer there.
There's no right answer.
Yeah, because I think taxpayers are driven by their own personal reasons, and whether you would say the environment where we believe that we are taxed at a higher rate will sort of encourage people to look at ways of evading tax. You know, I don't really think you would say that would be an absolute reasons. And I think, you know, if we look, you know, of the recent decades, I think a lot has been done, I guess, from SARS in terms of ensuring that people are compliant. And I think Thabiso talked about the many initiatives about the auto-assessment and all that. And I think we also, I would have thought as a country, we are educated to a level of appreciating that, yes, we each as individuals have responsibilities in terms of, you know, reporting the revenues where the relevant taxes has to apply. And no doubt that, you know, if the environment is created for people to appreciate their responsibilities, there would still be pushbacks. I guess, you know, if we look year on year, when the Auditor General talk about wasteful expenditure, those are big numbers. And I would have thought, as all of us in this room, I think it's heartbreaking to say we are playing our part, we're contributing by paying our personal taxes, but we've got lots of revenue that's not accounted for. That I think, talking back to the expenditure question that you asked earlier, if you look at it year on year, the numbers of wasteful expenditure, that could be used effectively in terms of either allocating and reallocation of the budget for the various ministries.
Yeah.
And yeah, so do we think that there's more that could be done in terms of ensuring that you know, evasion or avoidance is not happening? I would have thought we have the right legislation in place, and I'm not sure as to how much further would you know, the country go in terms of, ensuring
Yeah.
that compliance is happening. And
Claude, in the short term, and I'm going to take this now to the floor in a moment. So, but I'm also going to ask you guys for some predictions on the 12th of March, which I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is going to be. But I just want to ask you. I mean, one of the other options is, we have this massive municipal debt. This, the municipalities generally seem to get a different treatment to general taxpayers because they don't have the same pressures on them as general taxpayers do when we don't pay taxes as fast or as promptly as SARS would like. I mean, do you think that there's an opportunity for them to try and fill some of the buckets that are empty in the short term? It's obviously a longer term play that needs to happen, but in the short term, in order to try and meet some of these targets?
So, I'll go back to what you said. There's only marginal gains to be had through more taxation and even better administration of the existing tax base. Undoubtedly, we don't have a tax problem. We have an expenditure and revenue problem, and we have a revenue problem because we have a growth problem. We have a growth problem because we have a non-performing state problem, and the municipalities are one of the key reasons why we have non-performing economy, right? I would venture and to say that probably we could do away with 25% of this government's real expenses. So I'm not talking about the debt repayment, probably 25, if not more. And it's just I haven't calculated that, but it would have just about zero effect on service delivery quality, but it would have a massive effect on expenditure and therefore balance the budget and reduce. So that's the lever. It requires, again, political will, right? Which has been absent, and that's immoral for me because we talk about morality, but how can we justify having people who just secured a 5.5% wage increase in an effectively 0% GDP per capita growth environment? So it's fundamentally unfair. So the interesting problem we have is that we know where the sources of growth would be if we had the political will to tackle on this public sector and misallocation of public funds towards the parastatals, for instance. It's there. The problems are known. The solutions are known. It's just not being done. And here, I'll finish by saying, I was very, very, I was very much against the GNU, and I was talking to a lot of my friends who were involved in the negotiations, because it was very clear to me that the GNU was turning into a kind of where the ANC kept control of everything. And I called friends at the DA in the middle of negotiations and said, just walk away. Just get up and get out. They'll run after you. So I'm pleased that we are finally at a point like that. If the budget speech doesn't happen March 31st, well, so be it. Let's just go through this painful crisis. Let's just get it right. It's now. AGOA is probably gone. So, if Trump can turn on Zelensky in 24 hours like that, and the European Union, who are we? He's going to squash South Africa like the rest of that, somehow surviving snail on the tarmac. That's us. So let's do our job. Let's stop thinking someone else is going to save us at some point. Let's get it done now.
It's a good place for us to land this plane, I think. One of the things that I would like to ask each of you just to contribute on now is, I know what you based on what we've had this conversation now, we basically know what we'd like to see in a budget. What do you think we are going to see? What do you think is going to happen on the 12th of March, factually?
Well, the minister is going to say something. Whether you like it or not, that's another different issue. I do suspect that, and I'm quite keen to hear the views of everybody else, but I do suspect that the VAT increase is out the window now. If you just read the mood of the country and how the reaction was towards that proposal, it almost tells me that any kind of like sober politician would want to revise that. And so, and I think we're going to get a lot of analysis around expenditure, much like we've been discussing this morning, which will be a bit more progressive. Right, but insofar as tax is concerned, I mean, I'm not anticipating quite a lot of changes around that. They had said that they're not going to touch the medical aid credits and all of those things. Well, maybe some of those things will be revised now, given where we're landing. But yeah, so those are my quick predictions.
Cool. Claude?
Yeah, we'll have a speech. It will be slightly less mediocre, but it will not tackle anything significant. It's a political point that was made, right, about the fact that the presidency and treasury have just done their own thing, in spite or against the GNU. I don't think that the goal there is really about the budget. I don't think it's really about 2% VAT. It's a political signal to say you can't go ahead and carry on doing these things like passing the expropriation act without us, and etc. That's what it is. So knowing, I've been here for 20 years, knowing South Africa, the South Africans, they'll sit down around the table, they'll find a mediocre compromise to keep, kicking the can down the road.
Okay. Rendani?
I would be of a similar view with the rest of the panel, in the sense that I think there will be a compromise. And the question is, what would that look like? Is it abandoning the 2%? Or could there be any negotiation that maybe a 1% instead of 2% increase? And if that compromise cannot be reached, I guess what is left is, again, expenditure. I think the government will have to re-look as to how they could reallocate the budget as it stands, and to ensure, I'm assuming if the increase in VAT is not going to happen, so they have to find a way.
Yamani?
Generally, I mean, a budget in itself, be it personally or business, it's supposed to be a painful exercise, where you make cuts and additions of things that you want and you don't want. I think as you capture it, what we witnessed was more than anything else a political grandstanding, because as I understand, the budget is being proposed and Parliament has to adopt it. And this was an opportunity for the speech to continue and then to be proposed like anything else, adopted or rejected, and that didn't happen. So where that leaves us now, I think within the next month when it comes back, we going to be tabled with a populist speech, which may be worse than what we would have had now, because it will almost be intended to shut the loud mouths and to please everyone. Definitely, I think the VAT aspect will be probably provisionally postponed until further notice. But for me, the scary part, we're going to get a populist speech, intended to please everyone within the different partnerships of the GNU, which I'm not sure how good it is, because as I've indicated, the budget is supposed to be a painful exercise, where you take away some of the nice stuff that you like, in order to achieve the end goal that you may need,
Okay, questions from the floor. Anyone? Oh, there we go, straight away. Sorry, if I can just ask you guys to pass the mic around when you do ask the questions. Thanks.
Morning, everyone, and good morning to the panel. Thank you for a very insightful discussion. I think I have two comments. And my name is Chrissy Dube. I'm an analyst from Good Governance Africa. I think that, the failure of the budget speech, is twofold. it does kind of reflect a crisis or an incompetent government, but at the same time, it sends a clear message that the GNU is actually working. It's not a majority party, it's not a multi-party coalition, but it's actually now showing that there is an element of unity. And one of the panelists spoke about the interest of the citizens, and I believe that the reason there's a GNU, the reason there's so many parties within the government is because there was different interests of the citizens, and that is what is now coming across as being represented within the GNU by this vote of blocking the budget speech. And then my second comment is to the system that was mentioned by one of the panelists. I believe that we cannot continue punishing taxpayers, as Rendani rightfully stated. Taxpayers are paying their taxes. They're doing the right thing. But we cannot continue punishing taxpayers for corruption. The system that's needed is a no tolerance and a clamp down on corruption. We spoke about municipalities and the debts and the deficits. There's SOE and rescue that goes towards SOEs, billions of rands every year. And this is where we see the government failing to address the cancer of corruption within the economy and then passing that down to the civilians who are doing the right thing and paying their taxes. So I think the system that needs to be implemented is a zero tolerance for corruption. And how can they do this? They can do this by simply moving to a sort of performance-based remuneration for civil servants, and not the minority civil servants who are at the front desks who always show up to work on time, but the ones that have the ability to make decisions, the ones that are in procurement, the executives, the ones that are meant to be accountable. You get your money regardless, whether you meet your targets or not, whether you have, wasteful expenditure or not. You get your salary, you get your halfway through the month bonus, and you get your birthday bonus, and you get your annual bonus. That needs to stop. That honestly needs to stop, and we need to find a system that has zero tolerance for corruption, and that is the only way that we can turn around, the economy. From a tax perspective, I'm not an economist, but when you increase taxation, you are reducing, disposable income, and you are increasing inflation. Healthy inflation comes from, increased demand. Right? And what you want to do is we're not like other states that can afford to pay, their citizens lump sums of amounts. But what you could try to do is at least reduce the taxation and then have them having more money to spend. Because when people have less money to spend, they think about their future. And what do? They save more. And that is what's going to make us not have the economic growth that we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a fabulous contribution. Anyone want to respond to that?
There's one aspect that I find intriguing. There's one aspect, I really agree with you, and so the moral or the immorality of this, it's in practice, in outcome, right? It's a welfare state for the servants of the people, right? And everybody else works for them in a way. And so there's a perverse inversion of responsibility and accountability. In terms of the GNU working, maybe now, but I'm not convinced, okay? Because I think they will sit down and negotiate something that is not in the best interest of the country. Everybody is in that pot now, and they're all kind of slow boiling, and it requires, I don't see the GNU as being the solution that will solve the problems. And then there is that unresolved tension between populism and reform. And as a matter of fact, we have created this myth, right? This myth of the good citizenry who is acting its own best interest and electing people who then do the wrong thing. When in fact, we see that in most countries in the world right now, people are willfully electing the wrong people, doing the wrong thing, out of despair or anger or frustration and the paradox is, look, Mbeki, and for me, I call them Mbeki and Mandela were the enlightened princes, right? What they did was considered almost despotic within the ANC and led back to that terrible, populist backlash and the promise of a democracy for the people. democracy is a complex thing, right? You need to have the social, the human capital, and even when you have that, right, supposedly in the US, they do something extraordinarily clever as electing, I can't come up with insults that are representative enough of my contempt for him. That's the paradox. The role of government is to lead, right, and to make the tough decisions, sometimes against what is in the short-term interest of vested interest. And what we see is that there's just not that capacity, that political willpower.
Any other questions?
Just a question for you, Claude. So, you said in the beginning that the ANC don't have any sort of economic policy, but it seems to me the only policy that they do have is taxation. Every year we wonder what taxes are going up and what spending it's going to cover. And so I guess, do you think that we'll look back on this budget as the turning point about how we think about the fiscus, or is it business as usual?
Well, it's business as usual if we let it be. I'm talking about agency here. Look, the way the ANC views the economy is a very simple, mechanical thing. There are those who are there to be farmed, and there are those who are there to be kept quiet through part of this farming process, and we are the ones being farmed. And then there are those who actually are the true beneficiaries of the system, which is them and their elected BE and corporate partners who sit in conclaves and say they're going to save the economy, and they don't. So for me, we've had three. This is state capture number 2 we're watching now, right? Select privatization by select people who are designing plans for their own enrichment, but not reform. And I've said that, right? There is no such thing as reform right now. It would take tremendous willpower on the part of the members of the GNU to really say, no, now it's true reform now or bust, i.e. we walk away from the GNU. And we go back to the people and we say, we're not able to deliver. That's what I'm telling some of my friends in different political parties to do. Walk away. Do not own this, right?
Of course, the longer they stay
here, go back to your voters.
The longer they stay here, the more accountable they become, and they become responsible for the blood on their hands.
Correct.
Right. Anyone? Other questions?
Hi, everyone. So I think what we have is an issue of people that have been in power now. They're so out of touch with reality, with what's going on at the ground, and they keep rotating the positions amongst each other. You'll have someone who's in charge of water that doesn't actually know what's happening with the water situation on ground, and they're not actually channeling the budget to actually fix what's currently happening, but instead they're using it to bail out like municipalities that they already know that they're not working. So why would you then want to go and give somebody that has failed to manage their current budget more money? And yes, you say there's going to be mechanisms to try and manage that, but should you not rather manage the current budget that they have and see if they're able to deliver on what they currently have instead of just giving them more money and see if they'll manage that even better? Because for me, it's like a roulette. It just keeps going round and round until you have somebody that actually understands what's happening on ground. Like we wouldn't have, for instance, the issues we have with water in Joburg if we had somebody that's willing to actually fix it instead of, okay, I'm getting my money and that's all that matters. Once my term is over, it'll be the next person's problem. So we have an accountability problem and people being out of touch with reality, honestly.
I'm going to do one last thing before we finish this up. At the beginning, we started with, I asked you all what you would rate the non-tabled budget speech at, if you would give it something out of 10. I want to know if you want to change your score.
No, not at all.
So 0.
I might drop it.
It might drop it below 0. Okay.
No.
Claude, yeah, you went low, right?
I didn't give it's not worse, it's beneath me to...
Understood.
Excuse me, it's beneath me to score this. I
Rendon,
cannot possibly even...
you gave it a 5.
I cannot insult...
In the context of the
no.
debate that we've had and the kinds of responses that's been elicited, you want to revisit that number?
No, I wouldn't change
Not.
it. I'll leave it there.
Okay, Yamani?
My answer is a bit stretched, and it's more than just the numbers for me. I think overall, I think at times we were a bit too harsh on South Africa as a country, not necessarily the government. In the context of everything, those that are in leadership, those that are governing, the transitions that had to be made. In fact, I'll go as far probably as to increase my rating because the chaos of 2 days ago goes beyond just the budget. It speaks to us as a country. I think I'm a biggest fan of this country. I think we've got huge potential. Some years back, I had a chance to live outside of the country, and I got to experience how good we have it. In fact, when I got back, when I said I was coming back, some of my friends couldn't believe. I had some friends from India, Pakistan, and I realized that they were shocked that I'm coming back because for them, they couldn't consider the idea of going back where they come from. Whereas for me, where I've been able to see what is out there, I could take the thought of coming back home. So I think that let's be easy on the harsh conflicts that are there and take the positives that are coming out of this, in that we're transitioning democracy. 32 years is not a long time, considering, how other so-called democracies have transitioned. And what we have now, we were having a situation where probably the political power and voting was more emotional and based perhaps on what happened in the past. And we're having a new generation now that is actually scoring and grading the government, which give us the GNU, what we have now, which will eventually force the politicians to do what they've been elected to do because now they've got a much more educated voting pool that will actually punish them, for the passes and the failures that they have, So in fact, overall that, without looking at the content, I'll probably give the whole conundrum that happened on Tuesday, on Wednesday, a huge pass, because it speaks more than to what was on the paper, to push us forward as a country.
I think that's a great place for us to close this conversation. Nice positive note. So thanks, everybody. Oh, Kenny's got something.
I just want to talk from a taxpayer's perspective. And I want to say I am very encouraged by your skepticism. Because as a taxpayer, Derek knows, we've got a group of companies. There's a rule in our business, we don't work for credit, we work for cash. But the rule is also, if we made cash, we must pay tax. I cannot punish the government from another level if there's corruption on that side and say, okay, I don't know what happens to the money and I don't pay. So I'm confident that when you guys leave here, that you will have that will and that push to go and make sure that on the other side is right. I'll keep on paying my taxes. Let me give you an example now. I've been in business for 25 years now, and SARS and I have developed a 4-name terms relationship, right? They call me dear taxpayer, and I call them dear receiver. So it's so endearing, I have a massive assessed loss sitting there. Last year we submitted provisional tax, 0. SARS comes back and says, dear taxpayer, around us, it's actually 4 million. Doesn't matter what you think. So how do I now say fight with SARS? Because I don't want to be tax non-compliant, all right? Wonderful, we pay the 4 bars. And then yesterday I get a letter from SARS, dear taxpayer, we appreciate your compliance. In actual fact, I expected a letter that says, thank you for the interest-free loan. And so what I'm saying to everybody here today, she was saying the GNU is working. I'm confident as a businessman I will continue to develop businesses. We've got a group of companies. I'll continue to build more companies because I trust South Africa's economy. I trust South Africa's democracy to work. And the reason why I'm intermittent fasting is there's 4 million rand sitting at SARS.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you so much. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure and a privilege to have you here and to host you in our little offices. So just want to say thanks to all the panel members and specifically Claude from joining us from externally. Thank you very much for your contributions and your directness and honesty as always. And there's some snacks at the back, guys. Order some drinks and make yourself at home. So thanks very much.